Sorry, Gavin Ortland, you've got to hold that L. You and the rest of Big Eva. Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of the buckets, and I have to just right off the bat give a big round of applause to Mrs. Basham. Shout out to Megs. I don't know if she would like me to call her Megs, but I'm calling her Megs right now because she did a bang-up job. Respects to the chef. I am about 6 chapters in to her book, Shepherds for Sale, and I have to say, I highly recommend. Big Eva is long overdue for a reckoning, and Megan Basham, in this case, is the wrecking ball. You see what I did there? You see my little pun there? Anyway, here's the thing about this book, Shepherds for Sale. Once you read it and you understand the general thesis, it is undeniable that the basic thesis of her book is not only rock solid, but should be concerning to any churchgoer. And it is very clear that there are certain, how should I say, uppity, high class, Big Eva, people who, probably think very highly of themselves, who think of themselves as the taste makers, the culture makers for the church. And what is very, very clear in this book is that they have a very, very, very acute appetite to be accepted by secular elites. And this is the kind of the root of the problem. And so I think, from my perspective, I am very, very thoroughly enjoying the documentation, the reporting. It has been very thorough. However, one of the things that caught me into this whole thing was seeing Gavin Ortland actually come out and complain that he was misrepresented in Mrs. Basham's book. And I had actually consumed a lot of Gavin Ortland's content, primarily his content on church history, in particular his content about Catholic accretions, right? Some of the errors picked up over the Catholic Church and the Reformation. And so I found Gavin Ortland's content in that respect to be not only great, but just probably the best resource that I can think of as a Protestant on the webs, right? So I really like his content. I found his some of his other positions, his positions on the flood. He did a kind of a interview with Dr. William Lane Craig, where Dr. Craig, who I used to be a huge fan of, introduced some absolute, in my opinion, indefensible nonsense about the fact that, the so-called historical Adam and Eve may have been some ancient hominid that evolved from, just complete nonsense. Anyway, Gavin Ortland, in my opinion, is a bit of he put it this way, he puts a lot of confidence in quote unquote science, right? And he seems to me to not understand that science is the stuff of people, just like interpreting scripture is the stuff of people. And so even though you might have an objective method, you don't always get objective results because, people are people. And Gavin Ortland just seems to turn a blind eye, in my opinion. When it comes to anything science related, he tends to have faith in science, or he tends to be one of those people who wants desperately to be thought of as scientifically sophisticated and not anti-science. And as you know, all I have to do is say the words, trust the science, and you'll understand why that kind of general posture is problematic, because you were beat over the head during COVID-19 and you were a conspiracy theory if you thought someone should take ivermectin as a prophylactic or some sort of therapeutic for COVID-19. And you were all of a sudden you were taking horse paste by the people who said so-called trust the science. So this whole scientism thing is a scam. We understand that to be a scam. And I think Gavin Ortland is a bit too eager to be seen as scientifically sophisticated. That is my view of him. But nevertheless, he is a good resource with respect to church history. Now, why is this all relevant? Because I really decided to read Megan Basham's book because of Gavin Ortlund's protests that he was misrepresented by Megan Basham. And I have to say, after actually reading Megan Basham's book, I have to say that I think Gavin Ortlund actually got off easy, because I think there was a good reason for him to be actually be treated a bit more harshly than she actually did. I actually thought she was rather mild in her criticism of him, given what he was actually saying. So I'm going to explain to you why that, and I have something a little controversial to say, because I believe I have what I would consider maybe even a potentially prophetic word. Now, I hesitate to say that because some people think that's spooky. I'm not talking about forthtelling, but I'm not talking about foretelling, like telling in the future, but rather forthtelling, where I apply I think a very deep and rich biblical principle that I read. I feel like the Lord has given me about this situation, and I hope you'll take it in the spirit in which it is given, because I feel like it's relevant. So I'm going to lay all that out for you about this thing with Gavin Ortlund in particular. Now, there are a couple of reasons, or a couple of issues, when it comes down to this thing, this kind of little, spat that Megan Basham is having with Gavin Ortlund. And that is his claims, supposedly, about supposed misrepresentation. That's one. Then there's obviously the overall theme of Megan's book, and where Gavin Ortlund sits within that overall theme, and whether or not Gavin falls into, I guess, the category of the kind of the theme of the book. And obviously the title of the book is Shepherds for Sale, and obviously a pejorative, a negative title. So, by implication, is Megan Basham saying that Gavin Ortlund is bought and sold by, secular progressives who have nefarious intent by, basically drawing him into their circle of influence. And then, as a kind of an offshoot of that principle, the question is, what, I guess, obligation does Megan Basham have to make distinctions between the people that she is mentioning in the book, because all of them are not guilty to the same degree? And so is Megan Basham, does she have an obligation to say, well, just because I mentioned Gavin Ortlund, and I might not be mentioning him in the same light that I might mention like a Russell Moore, who she's got a lot of smoke for, or a J.D. Greer, who she's got a lot of smoke for, or David French, who she's got a lot of smoke for, but where Gavin Ortlund, who may not be on that level of error, but still error nonetheless. And so does she have to say, well, I'm not saying he's for sale and blah, 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 blah. So those are really the issues here. So, but I want to give you one example of what Gavin Ortlund said is the supposed misrepresentation about from Megan Basham, and then whether or not it's Megan's kind of assessment of Gavin Ortlund's error, or what she considers error in the book. Is it appropriate? So I want to show you this little clip here. It kind of gives us a little bit of insight into the issue, and then we will talk about it.
Now, that's just true. I don't think that's a responsible posture for Christians to take. But Megan switches it to make it about not accepting the scientific consensus. If you're going to go against a near consensus in the scientific community, don't just shoot from the hip. Study it and make sure that that's a wise thing to do, because I see a lot of people reacting instinctively rather than really hitting the books. And I don't think that that's a responsible posture for Christians to take.
Now, all right. So that little clip I got from a thread that Neil Shenvi posted, where he appeared to be defending Gavin Ortlund from Megan Basham's claims a bit. And so in the clip here, Gavin Ortlund is saying, basically, there's a part in the book where Megan Basham quotes Gavin Ortlund when he says, hit the books. He uses that term, hit the books. And he's saying that Megan Basham is saying that if you don't agree with his position on climate change, it's because you haven't hit the books. And he's saying, I'm not saying that if you agree with me, you haven't hit the books. I'm saying that if you're going to go against a near consensus, before you do that, you should hit the books. So this is supposedly some, example of misrepresentation. And I have to say, um, you know, let's just say, just for the sake of argument, that he has a point. Okay. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't get you off the hook, because overall, Megan Basham's criticism of Gavin Ortland is spot on. And if you want to say that she misattributed some words to you, or she misrepresented what you were saying, she's not saying that, he was not saying that you have to agree with him. That's fine. I don't actually think that's what she was saying. But even if I granted that, it's kind of it's not really something that gets him off the hook, because right in that statement is really the crux of the error that he is promoting, which is, he says, if you're going to go against a near consensus. So this is where Gavin Ortland's scientism that I mentioned earlier, this is where it shows, and this is where his kind of eagerness to be seen as scientifically sophisticated at the expense, I think, of and when I say scientifically sophisticated, I mean in the way that a secular person would see him as scientifically sophisticated. There's a lot of secular people, they think if you don't accept every aspect of evolution and billions of years, and because Gavin Ortland is a person who accepts those things, those premises, billions of years, evolution, he is a person who affirms those as, legitimate science. This is another thing that falls into that category. But the problem with it, though, is that it's false, right? And his supposed study of the subject really leaves much to be desired, because, as Megan Basham points out in the book, which I'll read a few quotes to illustrate what I'm saying, if he actually had done the study that he says he did, he would know that so-called near consensus is not actually a consensus, and really just a kind of a politically motivated, often repeated myth. So let me give you a few examples of this. But before I do this, here's the thing about Gavin Ortland and pretty much everyone in the Big Eva circle that Megan Basham has in the crosshairs in this book. These people are like masterful in the Mott and Bailey fallacy. And I learned about the Mott and Bailey fallacy not too long ago. And it's really important to understand what it is. The Mott and Bailey fallacy is where you take one premise that is not controversial and almost everyone will agree with, and then you take some principle in that overlaps with a much more controversial and widely contested premise, right? And then you try to advance the contested premise based on its overlap and similarities with the thing that is, that everyone accepts. So then when the thing that you're trying to advance gets refuted, then you retreat back to the less controversial position and say, oh, well, you haven't refuted my point because, you already agreed, X, Y, Z. And this is what Gavin Ortland does with his climate activism admonitions, right? He's saying that Christians should be leading the charge. He should be leading the charge on climate change, right? And he starts this thing by saying something to the effect of, hey, just as a scriptural matter, we should be open. There's nothing in the Bible that says we should be against climate change. And, there's just as a matter of, what the Bible says, we should have a general posture of openness, right? So this is the Mott part of it, right? This is the not controversial part. And then he says from there, yeah, and Christians should be leading the charge on climate change because there's a near scientific consensus that human-caused climate change is a real thing and a serious problem. And that's the Bailey, right? That's the thing that is hotly contested, and that has nothing to do with whether or not we should have a general open posture, and we shouldn't, as a matter of principle, just reject climate change out of hand. So this is the Mott and Bailey fallacy. So I want to read a few clips from Megan's book that will illustrate why I think Gavin is doing this, right? And to understand this particular part of it, you have to understand basically some of the premises of Megan's book, because one of the things that she builds up is that there are Christian organizations that do not accept the premise that human-caused climate change is a big problem and we need to have all of these centralized government policies and we should be open to cap and trade and all of these kind of big government policies that you might see in, say, like a Green New Deal in order to deal with some of these issues. It just isn't true, right? That is particularly the way that we should respond to supposed climate change. And because there are actually good resources and good Christian organizations where there are plenty of expertise and scholarship, where someone like Gavin Ortland would have known better, but he doesn't go to these resources. So here's an example of that. So she writes in her book on page 26, and this is actually the same page that Gavin Ortland claims that Megan Basham misrepresents him, which is interesting because he focuses on the supposed misrepresentation and doesn't take into account the fact that he just got exposed for his supposed lack of studying or really looking at the breadth of the information. She says, Ortland doesn't seem to have a full breadth of study on the issue himself, or he would know what is meant by scientific consensus. As Dr. Roy Spencer, the NASA climate scientist who helped Beisner write the Cornwall Alliance's response to the EEN's 2006 letter. So the Cornwall Alliance is that organization I was telling you about, the Christian organization who doesn't grant all the premises that human-caused climate change is a big deal. He says, he pointed out in the Wall Street Journal, the off-cited claim that there's a 97% consensus in the scientific community on climate change is a myth, one cobbled together from agreement on a variety of premises. The vast majority of scientists agree that temperature averages have increased slightly in the last 150 years and that man-made greenhouse gas emissions have contributed to some of that rise. What many don't agree on is how many humans are contributing or how serious a threat this poses. Another quote here on page 27, it says, Ortland's appeal to consensus also fails to consider the severe professional and reputational damage any scientist who questions the conventional wisdom risks. In September 2023, climatologist Dr. Patrick Brown admitted in the Free Press that in order to get his paper published in Nature magazine, he deliberately left out factors that contributed to increased wildfires in California and focused only on climate change, right? So as consulting meteorologist Anthony Sater pointed out in 2022, no human-caused climate change challenger wants to be blacklisted or deplatformed or lose an opportunity for good grant money or miss a chance for an advanced degree or end his science career. Now, this is the thing that starts to get particularly damning for Ortland, because Ortland, just like I said, he has this kind of this naivety that it's like, oh, but there's a scientific consensus. And this is exactly this is exactly the way they manipulate you. Just like, for example, with COVID-19, when they said, again, like if you took ivermectin, that you were taking horse paste, and she well documents this in the book. And this is probably one of the most compelling chapters in the entire book. Is her chapter on the COVID-19 propaganda and how pastors spread that COVID-19 propaganda. The whole idea of this consensus is that the consensus is manufactured. It is contrived. It is not actually a consensus when everyone who actually speaks out is blackballed or blacklisted or discredited or said they're a quack or they're a kook. That's exactly what they did to Jay Bhattacharya when it came to with COVID-19. And there were many, many doctors who came out and said the lockdowns are stupid, the masks don't work, the vaccine is not really a vaccine in the way that you think it is. And every single one of those persons were correct, and they were also discredited, and they were saying, trust the science. So this is the thing that Gavin Ortland pretends not to understand. And I say pretend because that's what I mean. I think he is pretending. I think this is a willful blindness. And I'm gonna circle back to that here. But I want to read one more quote. And this is to me the most damning. Now, Beisner, who is the person that Megan Basham is interviewing, Dr. Beisner is, once again, a part of that organization called the Cornwall Alliance, chock full of both theologians and actual scientists, right? This is what Beisner said when Megan Basham asked her about whether or not they get calls from so-called Christians who are looking for kind of an opposing view to the so-called consensus. He says, when I asked Beisner, let me come back to that here. I think this is a different one. She says, Gavin Ortland is well positioned with the Keller Center and the Gospel Coalition to be the sort of mainstream conservative evangelical influence New America was hoping to see. In 2023, the Gospel Coalition hosted a debate on climate change between two men who had no scientific expertise, who both agreed that climate change is largely human-caused and represents a serious problem. Their only serious disagreement was in how to address it. This raises a question. Why don't these organizations seek out experts like the climatologist at the Cornwall Alliance, who are certainly more credentialed on climate science than people like Dr. Moo somebody else that she was talking about, or if the issue is a combination of theological and environmental expertise, why not call Dr. Beisner? And she asked Dr. Beisner, do you ever get calls from people like Gavin Ortland or people from the Gospel Coalition or the Keller Center? And the answer is no. They only talk to, they have, quote, debates where both people agree that human-caused climate change is a big deal. It's just like, well, let's just debate how we should deal with it. Not whether or not human-caused climate change is itself, which I think is a controversial position, and the evidence against it. They don't want to talk to people like Dr. Beisner. So don't tell me, Gavin Ortland, and those of your ilk, that you are just trying to study the evidence and you hit the books and talking about other people going against consensus and that they should hit the books. What I would say to Gavin Ortland is take your own advice. Take your own advice. Hit the books. Okay. Now, just one other thing here that I wanted to point out about this, and this is another thing that Gavin Ortland said that Megan Basham supposedly slandered him on. And this is interesting. It says here on page 27, when I asked Beisner about Ortland's assertion that Christians resist engaging on climate change because they've been politicized, he minced few words, which is something that Gavin Ortland definitely said. He says, the Christians who have become activists regarding the issue are almost invariably doing so because they've been politicized. I can almost guarantee you that Gavin Ortland has never read any significant part of the scientific reports of the IPCC. He may have read press releases from it. He might possibly have read the summary for policymakers for the latest IPCC assessment report, but that would be about it. Now, here's the thing about that. Gavin Ortland says, well, I was slandered by Megan Basham because she was out here making claims that she knew that I didn't read the in-depth reports in the scientific literature from the IPCC, and she doesn't even know that because I have read it. And the truth of the matter is that Megan Basham didn't even say that he didn't read it. She asked him a question, and she was reporting what he responded. And not even Dr. Beisner said that he definitely didn't read it. What he said was, and if we're being technical, because that's what Gavin Ortland and Neil Shenvi and other people who come to his defense are saying, Dr. Bison said, I'm almost certain. So he didn't claim that he had direct knowledge, but he said he was just stating his opinion. He says, I'm pretty confident that what Gavin Ortland has actually read is not the actual data, but he's read actually like press releases and kind of headlines and things like that, but not the actual data. No, so that was what Dr. Beisner said. That wasn't what Megan Basham said. But the one thing that was valid about that whole thing is that while he claims that people are resistant to climate change, so-called science, is because they are politicized, and that's uniquely American conservative thing, is that he's the one who's being politicized. And this goes back to what I think is an important kind of through line throughout Megan Basham's book, which is the different degrees of culpability, but also the undoubtedly clear effect of people opening the gates to left-wing propaganda with the express intent of basically changing the culture in the church and changing the ideas and minds in the church to get them to become more progressive. And so the question is, because Megan Basham, like I said, she there's clearly different levels of culpability. Like if you read the chapter on COVID-19, she is like absolutely smashing and absolutely basically taking to the cleaners somebody like Dr. Francis Collins, who is the NHS director, who was Tony Fauci's boss. Like anybody who comes away after reading that book and thinking that Francis Collins is even a Christian, much less a credible scientist. I'm not. I don't want to discredit his scientific credentials, but Francis Collins is not only a dishonest man, but that guy is not a Christian. That guy is not a Christ follower, and I don't care what nobody says. The character he displayed is absolutely deplorable, and she makes that very clear. But does that mean that she's making Gavin Ortland, putting him on the same level of culpability as somebody like Francis Collins? The answer is no, and she did not explicitly say that. So in a lot of ways, Gavin Ortland is kind of butthurt because she's saying, are you implying that I'm for sale and blah, 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 and you don't say explicitly that you're not talking about me in the way that you're talking about other people. The way I see that is Gavin Ortland needs to get over himself because he is not innocent. And I guess I want to close it by kind of giving you this illustration. I told you I was going to have what I consider to be kind of a prophetic word, and I think that it is. I think if you pray about it and hear what I'm saying. There's a story in the Bible, and I hate to call it a story, but there's a narrative in the Bible where David actually goes and recaptures the Ark of the Covenant, which had been captured by the Philistines in a previous battle, right? So David recently becomes king. The Ark of the Covenant during his, initial time as king was not in Israel. And the Ark of the Covenant represented the presence of God amongst the people of Israel. And so he went to go get it back. And when they were bringing it back, one of the men that were with him, this is by the way, if you want to read the story, it's in 2 Samuel chapter 6. One of the men, because the Ark of the Covenant was being pulled on a cart by 2 oxen, and as the cart was being pulled, the oxen stumbled, and the Ark of the Covenant began to fall. And this one of David's men, he reached out his hand to touch the Ark of the Covenant to stop it from falling. So this was a very natural and instinctive thing to do. Seemed like a very innocent thing to do. You don't want the Ark of the Covenant to fall. But when he did that, the Bible says that God killed him because of his irreverent act. Now, this may seem harsh. And on first glance, you might say, man, that's kind of hardcore. All the guy was trying to do was help, and God killed him. Like, what's that about? But there's more to the story than that, and you have to understand the total context. You see, the reason why the Ark of the Covenant had been captured in the first place is because a failure of leadership. Eli, who was the priest in Israel and kind of considered the spiritual leader at the time, this was before Israel had any kings. This was before Saul was anointed king. He was the priest in Israel, and by all accounts, he was a good man, but he had two wicked sons named Hophni and Phinehas. And Eli knew that Hophni and Phinehas were doing evil, and they were taking bribes, and they were sexually immoral, and all the things. But he didn't do anything about it. And God was angry with Eli because of that. And because of that, kind of the general kind of posture in Israel was one of kind of lax standards. It appeared at the time, and but Eli was kind of emblematic of that. And so God said, "I'm going to judge Eli and his household," and he actually told Samuel that, who kind of was the successor to Eli. But he also kind of judged Israel because Israel ended up getting into this battle with the Philistines, and like 30,000 men were lost, and they captured the Ark of the Covenant. And that's how it happened. So it was a failure of leadership in the first place by Eli. Now, fast forward from the time that happened to when David became king. So this is after Saul's reign and kind of David's taking over. And that's when David found himself recapturing the ark. But there's something interesting that happened when the Philistines captured the ark. Stick with me here. This is going to be well worth it, the payoff here. When the Philistines captured the ark, God started to plague them. He started to plague the Philistines because he's like, I'm the God of Israel. I'm not your God. I'm judging them, but that doesn't mean that I rock with you, basically. So he struck these people with pestilence and tumors, and some of them died. And so they didn't want the Ark of the Covenant anymore. They had captured it, but they said, this thing that's kind of representative of Israel's God, we don't want it anymore. It's got bad vibes, right? It's bringing bad things upon us. And so they wanted to send it back to the Jews. They wanted to send it back to Israel. But they didn't want to take it because having it in the first place is what was causing them all these problems. So what they did was they took the Ark of the Covenant and they put it on a cart, and they had 2 oxen pull it. But they basically just said, hey, this is how we'll know if the God of Israel is really doing all of this to us. We'll just, set the cart, and if the oxen goes toward, Israel or Jerusalem or whatever, then we'll know that this was the Lord. But if it goes in the other direction, then we know that this just happened to us by chance. And sure enough, it went the other way, and it went to Obed-Edom's house where it stayed, and then God blessed Obed-Edom for some time. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here's the tie-in. See, the Philistines did not know who the God of Israel was. They didn't understand his ways, didn't understand that he was holy. And so the fact that they put the Ark of the Covenant on a cart, kind of pulled by 2 oxen, they also did something weird where they took some golden tumors and golden rats, because those are the two of the things that God afflicted them with, when the Ark was with them. They fashioned some tumors and some rats out of gold, and they put it in the thing with the Ark, and they sent it away as an offering. Think about that. Tumors and rats. Really weird. This is kind of indicative of the fact that people who do not know the ways of God, they don't even know how to honor him. They don't know how to deal with God, and they certainly don't know what the rules are for transporting the Ark of the Covenant. But God had specific rules, and it certainly wasn't that you would put it on a cart, basically transported and pulled by a couple of beasts. The way that Israel was instructed to carry the Ark of the Covenant was to carry it. The men were to carry it. They were to carry it on their shoulders so that the ark was above their head in reverence to God. It certainly wouldn't be right for them to put it on a cart carried by 2 beasts. Now remember that, because when David recovered the Ark of the Covenant, that's exactly what they were doing. They decided that they would move it from Obed-Edom to Jerusalem, but they put the ark on a cart. They put it on a new cart, because it was on a cart when it arrived from the other 2 beasts, and then they had the oxen towed it. Well, they should have known better, because they know that there's no way that the Philistines would have known that, but the people of Israel, the people of God, should have known better to reverence God and to honor God There's no excuse for them not to do it, even though the Philistines, that was just what they did because they were ignorant. And so the real takeaway is this. When the church tries to do things that the world does, and the church tries to be like the world, then you are culpable because we know better even though they don't, right? And the thing about a lot of these things that Megan has uncovered in this book is that what we have is the church emulating the world, the church wanting the approval of the world, the church doing things that the world is doing. So if you think about everything that Megan is putting her finger on in the book, it's that from COVID-19 to CRT to Black Lives Matter to climate change activism, what we're doing is that the world, the wicked, which the Bible says the wicked do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it perfectly. The wicked is setting the tone. They're setting the tenor. They are determining the overall direction of what is considered good and right and justice. And then we try to take that, right? And then we try to stuff those upside down ideas, those ideas from the world, and we try to Christianize them. And we try to do it in the church like what the world is doing, just like the children of Israel who tried to copy the methods of transporting the Ark of the Covenant that they got from the heathen, from the Philistines, which was wrong and which they should have known better. So now they try to basically make that their method of transporting the Ark of the Covenant, which God expressly forbid them not to do. So when you understand that concept, and when you understand that context, God didn't kill one of David's men because he was just trying to be helpful and reached out his hand to stop the Ark of the Covenant from falling. He killed him because they shouldn't have had the Ark of the Covenant on a cart in the first place. And the only reason why he had to reach out his hand to grab it because the oxen stumbled is because they weren't sanctifying God in their hearts in the first place. And that was the problem. And so, how does this relate to people like Gavin Ortland and other people in the body of Christ who seem to always be in a posture where they end up getting duped by these left-wing progressive ideas? And then they say, oh, well, we're just trying to be helpful. We're just trying to have a conversation. That's always there. They're always kind of like, oh, I did, just like there again with the COVID-19 propaganda and the nonsense. And then once everything that the so-called conspiracy theory said was true, and everything that a lot of churches who were resisting the tyranny of the state by saying, no, we are going to gather and meet in our churches in person. And they were saying, no, we're not going to be forced to take this experimental vaccine. And all of these other people in Big Eva that were saying, well, if you love your neighbor, you'll get the vaccine. And if you love your neighbor, you'll wear a mask and you won't go gather in church because, you'll be killing grandma in the church service. When it came out that all of those people were right, then what did the people say? What did the Big Eva say? Oh, my bad. Sorry, I was just trying to help. Right? And just like people think that the guy who stretched out his hand to stop the Ark of the Covenant from falling, that God should have took it easy on him because, he was just trying to help. No, that's a bunch of nonsense. The reason why Big Eva and people like Gavin Ortland and the rest of them, the reason why they keep getting duped is because they care too much about what the world thinks. That is the through line with this whole book. And I'm not finished reading it. I'm at chapter 6. But these are very well researched chapters. And that is the problem. Gavin Ortland, this is why I say he got off easy. He got off easy. Because he is plenty culpable. Because the posture of the heart, that's the reason why they keep getting taken to the cleaners, why they keep getting duped by things like CRT and COVID-19 and climate change, and you insert whatever left-wing progressive ideas. They keep getting sucked into this because they want the approval and to be seen as reasonable by people who hate our God. And that's the problem. So that is my brief assessment, my not so brief assessment, my way too long assessment of the situation between Megan Basham and Gavin Ortland. And what I say to him is what I say to the rest of them: hold that L, because you're not blameless. But I'd like to know what you think. Do you think that Gavin Ortland has a point? Do you think that Megan Basham is doing God's work? I certainly think she does, but let me know in the comments. And till next time, my friends, God bless you.